Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Salam, hello, peace to you all, and welcome to the program, another edition of our continuing live stream panel series, Iran versus the Epstein Empire. This is episode 13, lucky number 13. There have been a lot of developments in the week or so since we last had a live stream on this topic. And of course, we should mention, of course, that we could easily call this series, and sometimes do, axis of resistance versus the axis of Epstein. And there are things to talk about all across the axis of resistance and multiple fronts. And to help me do that, of course, in this collaborative live stream program and series are my colleagues and comrades from Resistance's Fertile podcast, one of whom is already here. We expect Indi to show up very soon, but we want to welcome you again, Benji, to this continuing series. It's good to see you, brother.
Yeah, thanks, Adnan. I'm going to say what I say every time I open this show with you. There is no other place I'd rather be. I have to apologize to our audience who were expecting this show to be on Tuesday, which was the first scheduled date, but I have problem with dates and I kind of messed up. So I asked my friends and comrades and brothers to push it back to Thursday, and which they very graciously did. So thank you very much for doing this. I hope our brother Indi, I didn't get completely mixed up in the dates. I'm trying to get hold of him. As it happens, I think it was the good thing to do, if I may say, because Tuesday we would have just, had to talk about Taco Tuesday and all this nonsense, which it wasn't actually a taco. I think it's just a build-up that is kind of flaring up at the moment. And my sense of things, and we'll see how what the panel believes, but my sense of things is it is actually reigniting, and we are moving from a fake ceasefire. And I could say a few things about this later. What was fake about it? To back to real war, round 2 of this. I think it's I want to call it complete the flood counteroffensive, and round 1 was of course won on points, and round 2 is going to be even a bigger win for Iran on points.
Yeah, so coming out swinging maybe in round 2. So Khatma Tufan, part 2. Yes, let's expect that. But likewise, we also have as our special guest Navid Farnia, who's been on this channel before, and you all know him as a stalwart member of the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective and a professor of African American Studies at Wayne State, and who works on U.S. imperialism and racial oppression in the U.S. and the linkages between the two. And we're very much looking forward to reading and perhaps having you back on, definitely for when your book comes out, National Liberation in an Imperialist World, Race, Counter-Revolution, and the United States. So, Navid, welcome to the series, Iran versus the Epstein Empire. It's great to see you.
Thank you so much, Adnan. Appreciate you having me, and it's great to be on. And greetings to Benji, and hopefully Indi soon as well.
It's coming in a minute.
Naval, here he is. There's Indi as well. Indi, welcome to the stream. It's great to see you.
Hi. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. No, we're just getting started and doing our usual rigmarole at the beginning, and I just want to remind everybody to like the stream, really help boost this on the algorithm, and make sure that your friends, colleagues, family, even your enemies, make sure they come across this. There's important discussion taking place. So like the stream, share it on social media. We're streaming also on several X accounts. It's easy to retweet it and other people will get a hold of this conversation. Don't be miserly with a good thing. I mean, you're here, you're in the know. I know you're going to go and talk with people and you're going to have all these wonderful points that you can share and all that, but, be generous, let other people in on it. So share it and subscribe to this channel, and also Indications, which we're also streaming on. That will be helpful. And the last thing I want to say is just that we're in the final home stretch for the SPOCs for Gaza, these small private online courses for Gaza, and the fundraiser that we've been doing. We're just over 3,000 shy of the final goal of 20,000 to be able to support Gazan students with extra data packages and internet access so that they can take these courses online, and to hire TAs to help deliver the course in person, or for people in Gaza who would be able to benefit from having a local TA to help with translation and so on. So please be generous. We've got a week left before this fundraiser ends, and we're trying to you've been generous. Many of you have been generous before. If you can support and help here in the final push, that would be fantastic. And so I've put it in the chat, and I will continue to do so, and maybe remind here and there. But please do be generous. So without further ado, I think it's kind of the topic that we should start with is the fakeness of the ceasefire. It was announced with a lot of fanfare, and immediately became very ambiguous whether it was being implemented, under what conditions, whether terms were being fulfilled, and so forth. And so, when we came up with the title, or when Benji came up with the title, which was a great title, at the outset, it wasn't clear whether we were yet in real war, but it seems like maybe we are now. And so let's sort of talk a little bit about the ins and outs of this very kind of ambiguous kind of situation of whether there is a ceasefire or not. And also, of course, the implementation of a parallel but related, clearly, ceasefire in the Lebanon front. And that also has been violated, and Hezbollah has returned fire, unlike in the past when for 15 months it abided very strictly to a ceasefire, even though over the course of 15 months there were more than 15,000 Israeli violations of the ceasefire. This is no longer the reality. This is the era of reciprocity, and Hezbollah has responded right away. So what thoughts do you all have about how this came to be and how it has unraveled so soon and so obviously, and what that really means for us? Navid, what thoughts do you have about the nature of this so-called ceasefire?
Yeah, thanks again for having me on the show, Adnan, and greetings to everyone. I think Iran has held up its end very well during the ceasefire. And yeah, I agree that it's not really a ceasefire when you have, for example, a blockade imposed on you during the ceasefire. But Iran has responded to every act of aggression very well. It began the ceasefire by saying that Lebanon has to be included in this, and basically Iran continued to engage in operations. I mean, in many respects, and also kept Hormuz closed until Lebanon there was a ceasefire on that front. So I think that in that respect, Iran has shown strength that perhaps some people didn't anticipate that it would. Iran has also responded to this blockade by attacking and seizing ships in Hormuz, right? So every action has garnered a reaction by the resistance, not just Iran, but as you mentioned, Adnan, with Hezbollah in Lebanon as well, right? Like the fact that every flagrant violation of the ceasefire that the Zionists are committing, Hezbollah is responding. They had a handful of operations yesterday, one of which is now being reported today by Zionist sources that there was a serious security incident. There are multiple more operations today. And so they're not letting them get away with anything, right? And so I think that, I think we need to understand like the nature of the ceasefire, that it's not really a ceasefire, but we also need to understand like why it is that Iran and the Axis of Resistance even agreed to it in the first place, right? And here I think is where a lot of people are a little bit off in their analysis. And that is to say that like negotiations are part of the struggle, right? Like negotiations are within the arena of struggle. And this is like actually a quote from Chris Hani in the South African liberation struggle, that I actually heard I actually heard Ghalibaf, the lead negotiator for Iran, say basically the same thing a few days ago. Like negotiations are as a part of the political struggle, as a part of the liberation struggle, right? And so, what does that mean for us who are analyzing this ceasefire? It means that we have to place pressure on those actors who, you know, like if we're operating from the West, we need to do our role to place pressure on those actors to, one, abide by the ceasefire, to, you know, like for the US even to like move to try to end the war or meet and under the leverage of Iran, so that Iran's demands can get met, right? So these are the political implications at hand with the ceasefire negotiation process, right? And I think we need to be as serious about it as the active hostilities, and, you know, and really take a clear position on it, right? Because, and the last thing I'll say about this is that, you know, the Iranians released like this poster, this flyer like last week that was like divided in three, and the bottom part showed like a military soldier, like the boots of a soldier. The middle part showed like a suit, someone wearing a suit, and the top part like the head of like just a regular person carrying a baby on top of their head, right? Like to show that there's three phases: the popular resistance, the political aspect to it, and the military aspect to it. So like those three things need to be aligned. And for us who are operating in the international arena, like we need to be aligned with that as well.
Quickly, actually, Navid, if you can find a link to an image of that, that would be great to show it, because I think that will continue to be relevant. So just pop it into the private chat and maybe we can share it. But I think that you raised some very important points about like the role of negotiations. It gives an opportunity for the anti-war forces in the imperial core to rally around saying no, you know, return or resumption of like war making. And you know, we haven't necessarily taken it as strongly as perhaps we could have, but there will be other opportunities if there is a return to negotiations and so forth, and we should be ready to put that kind of political pressure. And I'd say from the other side, we have seen that the Iranian people who have been in the streets constantly have reinforced the power of their position and their diplomats to abide by a strict understanding of the 10 conditions, that they should not bend and they should not bow to political pressure in the course of negotiations on key goals that have been won militarily in the field. These should not be given up, and that Iran's sovereignty should be defended. So I think you're right that they have, you know, the people of Iran have used the moment of negotiations to show that they are maintaining their revolutionary spirit and continue to make demands that actually force their leaders to remain strong, because they have the people behind them pushing them. And that also you know, should give us calm when there's been a lot of panic in certain quarters of the online left, both Iranian in diaspora and like, you know, lefties, you know, kind of worrying and questioning and, oh, this is a mistake, and, you know, spreading kind of defeatist, you know, concerns, in that the real security is established by the people, and they've done so in the streets. So that should give us confidence that whatever, you know, reformists and so-called principlist differences, etc., that the people are forcing a unified and strong position that their leaders cannot afford to abandon, even if they wanted to. And they don't want to, but they have visual evidence. And that is communicating also to the US side, that whatever attempts that they might have had to confuse, divide, forestall, kind of activity of the resistance, that has not worked. People are demanding, continued solidarity with the people of Lebanon and the people of Gaza and so forth. So I think that's really, an important kind of point. Any other thoughts, Benji and Indi, about ceasefire before we, talk about some of the more recent developments?
Let's have Indi. Indi, by the way, you're not late, you're early, because for you it's
perfect.
Incredibly
it's
early, isn't it? Yeah, 5:30.
So what I say about the ceasefire is that Iran's shots have already been fired. It's just taking a while to reach the empire's brain. I call it like I have a piece called "Time is on Iran's Side," and I say that what Iran has done is they fired hollow point bullets at the West, at what we call the White Empire, in that there's a hollow in the global economy of about 20%, and it's a load-bearing hollow. And it's just taking a bit of, it's already reached Sri Lanka, it's already reached Australia, it's already reached the Philippines. It's just taking a while to reach North America. But I think just a few days ago was the last ships that got out of Hormuz pre-war that arrived in Western ports. So they're drawing down their strategic reserves. They're people like to say that the U.S. is energy independent. It's not. It requires a certain mix of fuels, which does come from all over, and oil is a global commodity. So prices here affect prices there. In Sri Lanka, we paid $286 for a barrel of diesel, which is shocking, but that is going to affect prices all over the world. You're seeing a huge split in the oil markets, where it used to be kind of a similar price between Brent and Oman, and between futures and present, and that's splitting in all directions. That's a huge crack in the global economy, and specifically in the imperial economy. America's like, oh, this doesn't affect us. Well, okay, as a country, but you're not a country, you're an empire. So your empire is being affected. And to know your enemy here, I remember with COVID, the only time this Trump specifically started caring was when it affected the stock market. His people could be dying, they don't care. Their soldiers could be dying, they don't care. And they could be losing military equipment. That's just sort of more corruption that they can do. But this is going to hit their global economy. And these are shots that have already been fired. These shots have been fired, and the impact will go for years. So I think people maybe watching the news want to see entertainment every day, but this isn't a game. And this effect has already happened. And this effect, we're dealing with an inhuman empire. Obviously, they don't care about humans. They just, I think, quadruple trapped a journalist, Amal Khalil. Like, there's no sort of human way to, there's no human conscience to appeal to here. But there is an economic sort of market to appeal to. And as much as they're denying it now, the future and the present markets are going to meet. And we're nearing that point. And those shots have been fired. And like I play Risk sometimes, as I think Navid does with his sister. And like a tie goes to the defender. A tie doesn't go to America. America's forces are overextended already. And they have no place and they have no home. They're homeless. They have no bases. So they're stuck on these aircraft carriers eating like shoe leather and I don't know, paint. And, its time is not on their side. So this ceasefire, if you want to call it that, the shots have already been fired by Iran, and America is the one bleeding out, and Iran just has to stay in Iran. What I say is that America has to move mountains, and Iran just has to not move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we called it fake ceasefire because it was a fake ceasefire from the perspective of the empire. A real ceasefire from the perspective of the empire is uses with fire. From the beginning of settler colonialism, settler colonies have never signed any kind of a ceasefire agreement or peace agreement with the people they have colonized and genocided that served any other purpose than allowing them to violate it, often before the ink on the document was dry. And we are seeing this ceasefire being so different from what we've seen before, because it's a ceasefire in which, and we've said this from the beginning of this series, we're at the point of dialectical inflection. So everything is turning into its opposite, in fact. Like you had security for the Gulf through these military bases that actually turned into insecurity and ripe, fat targets for Iranian missiles. And you have the same thing, the ceasefire that is supposed to help the colonizers impose their savagery upon the people that they have brought to near exhaustion, hasn't resulted in that. And although we had one of the most savageous assaults by the Zionist colony, I think they killed more people in one day in Lebanon, like over 100, than they had ever done before in one day, and then did this after the ceasefire was agreed, to show that for them it was business as usual, but it wasn't business as usual, because the people who were supposed to seize are firing back. And this is extremely different. Also, Brother Adnan, you've talked a lot about how it's all about reciprocity. And this is what it is about. And I believe what Iran is doing, whether they're doing it consciously or not, is they're already building the world of tomorrow. And in the world of tomorrow, when one party seizes, which is also, I believe, Islamic law of war, you also cease firing, but you don't disarm until your enemy, especially one as untrustworthy as genocidal white empire, has proven that they can be trusted at last. But as a human being, it behooves you to always keep the door open to common humanity, even to those inhuman monsters. And that's something really hard to get, because we all want, many of us have been raised on Hollywood films, so we want to see the bad guys, beat to a pulp. But it's about building the world of tomorrow. And one thing that Brother Indi said that is, I think, a very apt image. The shots have been fired, they have rung around the world, and it's a kind of explosive munition that went straight to the brain of white empire and exploded in the form of all things, Lego videos, right? Today there was a program on CNN about those Lego videos, and we are reaching the point where those Lego videos, I believe he might already have seen them, but where the head of the empire, whoever that is, whatever that is, the collective brain of the empire is going to see them, and they are going to explode. Yesterday, we had this amazing conversation with Warwick Powell, who's just published this new book where he talks about energy, the thermoeconomics. And one thing that was particularly evocative to me is how he speaks about information as energy. And to get, good information, like real-time information, you need a hell of a lot of energy. You need those data centers, you need those wires, you need those, cables all over. But the way capitalism has been working is by mixing a lot of noise into the information flow so that you keep the good information to yourself and you can make money with it. And we have seen white empire do this from the beginning of this war, and we saw them do it again on Tuesday, in which they throw, handfuls of noise in the information flow just to manipulate markets in the short term. And they're throwing the same noise in the futures market when, and everybody goes, and the kind of anti-imperialist analysts who are still, imbibing at the teeth of white empire go, oh yeah, but oil is back under 100, without realizing we're talking about future contracts. If you actually want a barrel of oil today, you need to pay 150. Indi, you said if it's a barrel of diesel in Sri Lanka, you have to pony up 190 or something. This is the real price.
It was 286. That's the marginal barrel. That's not, God willing, it's not what we're paying, but for everything.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But it's it's to get a real barrel of diesel into your hands today if you want it in Sri Lanka. So this is the real stuff going down. And on that stuff, white empire that only speculates short term because it's been so dominant in the information sphere, right, that it could throw any amount of noise and make a buck out of it is unable to process, probably because the bullet got to its vital brain nerves already, the long-term effects of what it's doing. You know, this idea that if they block oil from everybody and they reduce oil production by 20-25%, then they will finally have the monopoly on everything and China will be crying uncle, is absolute nonsense, because China has been preparing for this for a very long time and they can actually withstand this kind of shock. Whereas it's not just the US allies in Japan and in Korea and even in the Gulf. Did you see now the Gulf are saying to the US, give us cash or we'll go yuan? Like they said this today, you understand what that means. But inside the US itself, their supply chains are so integrated into the world system that they will be hit. Furthermore, they are run by oligarchs, and no oligarch is going to turn to Trump and say, oh, you're right, we produce enough oil here, so we'll price it at whatever you want us to price it so that gas remains under $4 at the pump. They won't do this at all. They'll go, hey, this is the market price, and you guys are apostles of the market, so you know, petrol at the pump is going to be $10, $12, $15, and that's just too bad. And so the downstream effects of this have not been computed by White Empire, who actually believes that Palantir AI is going to keep the US population down. Well, I've got news for you guys. AI is not intelligent. And because it is so full of noise, you see it through its hallucinations, through its trying to, you know, they've created an AI that's sycophantic, that's trying to please the person asking questions. It's not going to be able to produce their panopticon dystopia, and therefore they will not be insulated from the consequences of what they're doing, which are going to be very painful at last for the imperial core. And it's such poetic justice in a sense that the atom bomb has been detonated. It's not the old one. It is really this oil shock, and it's been detonated by White Empire itself, and it will hit in priority White Empire and its colonies, because thanks to not being sanctioned, they haven't developed the resilient economy, the more autarkic economy that has allowed many sanctions countries to develop food sufficiency, some form of fuel and energy, I can't find the word, a substitution, and all the rest of it. And the societies have learned how to withstand the pain, whereas we can't even withstand pain to our egos, let alone to our wallets.
It reminds me of the scene in the the Princess Bride, where the Dread Pirate Roberts is having a duel of wits with the Sicilian, and the Sicilian says, "Okay, I'll come to the joke later." So the Dread Pirate Robert puts like a vial in front of him and says he puts two vials and says one of these contains poison. And then the Sicilian is like, "How you made like one of the classic blunders. First is don't start a land war in Asia," which is exactly what Trump has done, and never have a duel of wits with a Sicilian. And then he mixes it up and he thinks he has it right and he drinks it. And then he asks, okay, which one has the poison? And then the Dread Pirate Robert says, well, both. I've developed well, he tells the girl this, but he says, I developed an immunity to it over time. And I think that's what Iran has done sort of with closing the Strait of Hormuz, which Trump is trying to claim now. He's trying to say like, well, no, I've blocked it, which is hilarious. But anyway, I just thought of that.
Yeah, if I may misquote the Princess Bride, I don't think strategic victory means what you think it means.
Exactly. And it was, a blunder of like, facing off with the Sicilian when death is on the line, right? That's what it is. And cackles, yeah.
And that actor's turned out to be all right. That actor is cool.
Yeah.
Well, so that's it. I mean, you could say years of sanctions has given Iran and its society immunity to the closure to the blockade. Yeah. Well, that's another topic itself, is, what the meaning of this blockade is, which was imposed and is, of course, an act of war, creating a naval blockade to, economically starve your opponent is considered an act of war, much like the way sanctions are not considered an act of war, but they are, in fact, as devastating as war. But what do we think about this kind of idea of the, absurd blockade of the blockade?
Well, I mean, one thing that worries me is that it extends the battlefront out to here. So they're seizing ships off the coast of Sri Lanka, right? And so the Indian Ocean has become kind of weaponized now. And the U.S. embassy in Sri Lanka is bigger than most of our government buildings. So and there's Marines there. So it's extended the war. People only call it a world war if Europe is involved, but
I saw today RJ on X and Fortress Resistance on Telegram, because his account was blocked by Twitter, has actually posted today that about 2-3 hours ago, the IRCG actually successfully stopped the US Navy from boarding a Iranian cargo ship. So, as they used to say about Joe Biden, it's Joe over.
Yeah, these are not the acts of like a strong navy, right? This is just piracy. They've just resorted to piracy and terrorism. That's
and they run away. And they run away when the adults show up, right? When the Royal Navy shows up, when the People's Navy shows up.
Yeah, I don't think they're not showing strength here. Like when Trump extends the ceasefire, that's not a show of strength. That's because he can't fire. And they're not, and also like normally in negotiations, they can rope you along for a bit, right? Like with the JCPOA or whatever, they can rope you along for a bit. There's a way to negotiate where it strengthens their power. And I think, Adnan, I was listening to something with you and Hassan Abu Sita, and he talked about how like the negotiations and like Oslo and stuff, they were a way to sort of fracture the internal cohesion of Palestine and to basically break off intellectuals and stuff. None of that stuff is happening. That requires some intellectual capacity on America's part or on the empire's part as well. And none of that is there. They're not using the ceasefire in any, I mean, even the word ceasefire, let's say, they're not using that in any strategic way. So what we do have is just a kind of time delay, and that does not go in their favor. The time delay goes to the resistance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Indi. I think perhaps the U.S. was banking on, this quote unquote ceasefire being a period in which Iran would not respond in any particular way to the U.S. and the Zionist transgressions, right? To your point, Benji, like, yeah, I mean, the IRGC is not escorting ships to its ports, right? Like, I think along the lines of what you saw, I saw that they just escorted a ship that had carrying rice to its port today. And yeah, I mean, none of this, to your point, indeed indicates any form of strength, right? Like this notion of blockading the blockade. But on top of that, now Trump is coming out and saying that we the United States want the blockade of Hormuz. Like we're the ones who are doing this, right? Like so it's like they're flipping the narrative on its head every time. Like they're saying that to your point, Indi, I totally agree with you that time is not on the U.S.'s side. But Trump continually comes out and says time is on the U.S.'s side. He came out today and said, I'm the least pressured U.S. president in history. Right, all of these things are like the exact opposite of the reality, right? And it is, to me, like it is a way to assuage the markets or whatever, right? Like the fact that the other thing too, like as the quote unquote ceasefire period was ending on, I believe, Tuesday / Wednesday morning for the West Asia region, right? Like the Iranians said flat out through Tasnim, I think, that they're not sending a delegation to Pakistan. Like within minutes, Trump says we're extending the ceasefire, right? Like as if to like assuage the market again, right? Yesterday, Aralchi comes out, I think on Twitter or whatever, and says that, you know, like there's no plan to send a delegation to Pakistan on Friday. And within minutes, Trump comes out and says Iranians are going to send a delegation, right? So he's almost trying to make it out to be where Iran doesn't have any control over the situation, where in fact it's the total opposite, right? And the markets are, you know, the markets may temporarily, you know, reflect what Trump says, because that's what capital wants in many respects, but like it's not going to reflect the reality, and so therefore it's not going to maintain in that way, in any tangible sense, right? So yeah, it's fascinating to see how like these markets respond to the statements of Trump, like who is, you know.
But what's interesting is that you know, the U.S., especially, you know, Trump and his administration, they are so on the back foot with events that it's almost like they have to kind of create the image, as you're saying, of reversing these narratives, almost as if words have some incantatory sort of magical power, you know? And it derives from this idea that, well, if the president of the United States says it, then it's going to, you know, create reality. And it's almost as if they, you know, heard the Karl Rove, you know, kind of claims in the mid 2000s that, well, we create, you know, you study, you're a reality-based community, you study reality, and we do these things, and then you will study them and react to them and criticize them. And meanwhile, we will go off and we'll be making a new reality, you know, which was this kind of,
which you'll then study.
Yeah, which you will then study, and you'll be doing, and we're just going to constantly be, you know, kind of creating reality. We create reality. We're agents in history at this moment of like total apotheosis, supposedly, of American power in the unipolar moment. At that point, it was not true. It was incorrect. It was ludicrous. It was already a declining empire. You know, it was, you know, these like. Invasions and occupations of Afghanistan and Iraq were just the death knell of the U.S. empire at the moment when people thought, hey, we're going to have to be an empire, you know, we're going to, you know, even though what they didn't seem to understand is the U.S. has always been this empire in the post-Cold War period in particular, and that this was the time when its decline was starting. But these people are one level removed, and it's almost as if they want to act like the George Bush era, that we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And it is, you know, like it's being falsified so quickly. That's the difference, is that it's falsified so quickly by actual reality in this era where, you know, media doesn't depend on, you know, these mainstream legacy outlets that are tied to the U.S. deep state as like stenographers of power and empire. And so as a result, it just looks really incredibly silly, and it looks very desperate, you know, in this time, very desperate.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that really quick. Their intelligentsia, like the Western intelligentsia, spent decades spreading their post-structural bourgeois bullshit to the rest of the world, like, and so much so that now like their ruling class is internalizing that, right? Like, meanwhile, the Iranians and the rest of the axis of resistance, and I would go so far to say other resistance formations across the world, like the AES, are operating in a materialist fashion to decimate empire, to basically brick by brick take empire apart, right? So while these people are operating in the clouds, in their own fantasy, and it's not to say that there are not people here in the United States who do not have a sober analysis. They're like, we don't want to underestimate, right? But at the same time, like this, the time for spreading post-structuralism, postmodernism as a way to manifest empire in other parts of the world, and making it work in order to quell like, structural forms of resistance, right? It's not working anymore. And we could say perhaps it never even worked, right? So yeah.
But it just hit me as I was listening to you guys that Trump is actually, the art of the deal is what's her name? Rhonda Byrne's The Secret for business people, right? So, this very new age idea that if you think about something hard enough, if you want it hard enough, if you look at it in magazines hard enough, then you'll get it. And it's really like this, mad Western idealism that you literally create reality with your thoughts. It goes with the positive thinking. It goes with all this kind of, self-help, self-development ideology, which, and Trump is really the epitome of this. I think the art of the deal is always expect the best and, go for the best and think positively, but prepare for the worst, by which he meant just threaten people like a regular mafia guy. But that only works if you've actually got the muscle and weapons and powder, but they don't have the muscle anymore. Like, has anybody looked at the US Army recently? It doesn't exist anymore. The UK Army couldn't fill Wembley Stadium. The French Army is maybe the only one that has still some people in it, but they have demilitarized in Ukraine. They don't have the weapons anymore. Like, we say, the ceasefire, they will replenish their stocks. But their stocks are what? Their stocks are empty. And they've put a new THAAD battery, and the next day, the Chinese helpfully gave a high-definition photograph of where it was. And they don't have the powder anymore. And so it's all this, literally magical thinking. Somebody said in the chat is just wish casting to get things done. And the problem with this, and this is how psychologically empire will collapse, is the very dark side of this new age. You create your own reality with your thought, is that, and I think it's also in kind of, the Protestantism in its corrupt form on Turtle Island, that if you don't get it, it's your fault. Like, if you don't succeed, it's your fault. And this is why we see Trump running away from his own disaster by going, I didn't want it anyway. Nobody knows what I really wanted, and I'm still winning, and all the rest of it. And all that noise is going to just, drown the empire in its own BS, and nobody will go and rescue it because it just stinks too much.
Yeah, I think it's like boiling water, right? Like, I actually take these moments of like ceasefire or fake ceasefire as an opportunity to sort of read more, because I don't think the information, I think, as Benji said, it's a lot of noise in the news cycle. And like, when you boil water, like a watch pot doesn't boil, you can apply a lot of energy to water and it doesn't look like it's doing anything for a while until suddenly it's boiling. And I think we have to zoom out a bit and see there's been a lot of negative energy applied to the imperial economy for a long time. COVID was a mass disabling event. 2008, they actually never really recovered from. And then the tariffs that was also a big shock. There's been a lot of negative energy applied to this economy. And now this is a lot more. This is, I think, a multiple times bigger shock than the Arab oil embargo, which at its time was enormous. I think the stock market like cut in half and so on. There's a lot of pressure on this pot. So it's going to boil. You don't need to watch it every minute, every day. And what I actually recommend is zooming out at these times. I take these times as an opportunity to read more. If you read, like, say, my main news source, like the Quran or the Bible, there's the story of Pharaoh, right? I used to read that and be like, why did it take 7 plagues? Like, after the 3rd plague, weren't they like, maybe I should change? But no, now I get it now. I think it maybe does take 7 plagues. I've counted 4 off the top of my head. I think there must be 3 more that I forgot about. But yeah, I think it does take multiple plagues for Pharaoh to get what's going on. But he's going to get what's coming to him. That's been written already.
Well, that's a great teaser for an episode that we're planning to do with you, Indi, Quran as geopolitics. And so people should look forward to that coming up in the, in a week or so from today. But yeah, that's absolutely instructive, about unwillingness to kind of recognize reality, change, and adapt to it. There's this insistence from this supremacist kind of projection that no, the world has to conform to our ideological vision. We see that with Zionism. We see that with U.S., empire. These are consistent kind of pathologies, we could say, of imperialist consciousness, and that is also, and it's something, the good Professor Marandi has always been saying as well, is that the problem is these people believe their own kind of racist, orientalist perceptions of us. And that's a big weakness, because it means they don't really understand what's going on. And so we do see that as a key problem. There was a question that had come up on a broader sort of topic, for you, Navid, I think, and it was essentially about how I'm trying to scroll back because it was a little while ago to find it. Oh, well, this is also an interesting question too here. This isn't the one I had thought of, but Iran would probably create more deterrence and more impact on Western public attention by conducting warfare, Israel-US style, big body counts, brutal hits on civilian targets. Why doesn't it? So
Western public attention has nothing to do with anything. Like you guys are run by corporations, not like people.
But also, this question of reciprocity, I mean, they have not been reciprocal in going all out against civilians or civilian infrastructure. They've been very careful and very calibrated. They have been reciprocal. They have not taken steps on the escalation ladder. They've responded to escalations that have happened by targeting and hitting things that matter. But yet still they have followed some sense of proportion and restraint. It's really quite stunning. We're not in the era of complete strategic patience, as in the past, but we're not also in all out, brutal, inhuman, genocidal warfare, because Iran has, and the other, components of the axis of resistance have simply, adhered to a higher, ethical and moral standard. And frankly, I don't think it would work. Actually, it would not work. But I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts about.
Syed Marandi said something about that. So he said that if Trump restarts the war, he told people in Qatar and in UAE to leave. He told them to go across the desert to Iraq or Yemen or maybe Oman. And he was like, I don't know if they have room for you. But he said, we will take everything out. And I take what he says seriously. But he said if Trump wants to restart this in any way, they will end it. And I believe whatever he says, actually.
I also would add that I think that to answer the question in part, for Iran and the axis of resistance, maintaining control is something goes along the lines of what you said, Adnan. Maintaining control of the escalatory ladder is very, very important, right? They could go big in these kinds of ways, but I agree it wouldn't work. And on top of that, it would just lead to a lot of deaths of their own people, right? Why? I mean, if your population has been galvanized by what's going on, right? And so maintaining this people's war is fundamental to what you're doing as a resistance, right? And so for me, fighting a low intensity war and bleeding the enemy, as India has pointed out, is advantageous for Iran. Just bleed the enemy, fight and the ceasefire period is a continuation of this low intensity war. What we see in Lebanon is a great example of that, but also the naval situation in both Hormuz and even out to the Indian Ocean, right? I actually want to talk more about the blockade a little bit, but we can get back to that. So
no, go ahead. Now's a good time to actually continue that conversation.
Yeah, so I think that the larger naval operations of the United States the fact, okay, we haven't mentioned, for instance, that they're currently sending the Bush aircraft carrier to the region. I think yesterday was like off the coast of Madagascar or something. So by estimates say that they're going to arrive in the next 2-3 days, I guess. But the other thing I want to mention about all this, and to the larger naval theater, and folks might say this doesn't mean anything, but actually I think it does. Somalia comes out yesterday and says that we're imposing a blockade on Zionist ships, right? And so people take it to mean it's more symbolic than anything, particularly the sort of perhaps it represents a form of unity with the Yemeni resistance. But I think on a larger scale, it also represents what I see as this gradual convergence of fronts between what's happening in West Asia and in East Africa. I think that it's not going to happen overnight, but I think the whole situation with Somalia and Somaliland and the Zionist recognition of Somaliland and the UAE's support for Somaliland, the war in Sudan, of course, the UAE is a central actor in that and supporting the rapid support forces. All of that is converging slowly, in my opinion. And that is not to the advantage of the United States. You're bringing more resistance actors into this situation, and you're bringing different angles of attack upon you. Some of them are, of course, not as strong as others. Like the Somalis are not very strong, but they're they stopped a vessel today off their coast, right? With a couple of boats, and so these kinds of things tend to escalate over time. And so we'll see how, if and when this war spreads, how these various actors will come into play, right?
Well, in fact, actually, the point is that Iran said it would be a regional war. Now, they didn't say exactly the scope of that region, but we're seeing that the region is actually a lot wider than we might expect, and that is because of things like UAE's involvement in Sudan and the RSF and the Somaliland point, because that empire and an extension through the UAE, and we just pointed out that they, as had been alluded before, that they're actually desperately asking for U.S. Treasury Secretary line of credit, essentially, because they have been suffering a lot of damage, and their whole kind of fantastical pyramid scheme economy based on, selling an image that is now in tatters, has, meant a big hit. But they had extended themselves into trying to have these ports all over and extending. And so what we're seeing is a kind of polarizing, across the region that includes actually a historic, we think of it as a very separate region. Oh, it's all the way over in Africa on the other side. These historically were part of common trade networks and trade routes across the Indian Ocean, through the Red Sea, the Gulf. And if the Bab el-Mandeb, we haven't even seen that, but there's already a sense of possible threat that Yemen will nationalize, in the same way that you could say, the Hormuz Strait has been nationalized by Iran, that they intend to do the same thing, is that this is an integrated kind of broader region that has a long history of being connected with one another. And so it makes sense in some way that Somalia, in response to the Somaliland, which is just like the UAE and these others, a construct of British colonial interference to carve off some kind of little vassal statelet and to fragment, the broader integrity of the region, that they would be a pro-Zionist and that Somalia would affiliate itself with the other population centers, the people of the region. And so I think that's a very important point that you raised about that this actually matters. And it goes back to the fact that, in fact, actually Somalia has a long history. People remember the pirates in Somalia, is basically they were extending national sovereignty over the environment in their territorial waters when there was overfishing, there was exploitation of their natural resources during a period when they had a weakened state because of intervention and collapse of their state. And then this was being taken advantage by Spanish and Portuguese, kind of fishing vessels and all the kind. And so the pirates were demanding that their sovereign waters, territorial waters of Somalia and the resources there be respected. And so this is in a way another kind of, example of the Iran war is opening up the possibility for the region to reassert sovereignty for itself against the empire. So I'm so glad you raised that, because it touched off a lot of associations in my mind historically that shows that this is a regional war that actually has global historical significance and importance for the empire.
And it's very, and that thing about Somalia, I think, has a lot of layers to it. I mean, you mentioned the so-called piracy, but we have also to remind our audience of, Bill Clinton's Operation Infinite Reach, which at the time also, because this is an imperial narrative, was rumored to be his answer to the Monica Lewinsky blue dress scandal. But, he actually bombed the one pharmaceutical factory in Somalia, claiming it was being used for chemical weapons. So all these threads are coming back together. And I think Morandi, if you want to know what's going to happen, don't listen to Richard Meadows, to the Squirrel, or to whoever in the West. Listen to people from the region, and listen to Mohamed Morandi, because he's been telling everybody, he says it all the time, and he said something very interesting this time. He said, if it starts again, it will be global, right? Before the first round, they said if it starts again after the 12 Days War, it will be regional. And I mean, it started again. Iran went regional, and then Trump said, nobody would have expected them to go regional, and no expert could have predicted this. So, I'm predicting that if Iran changed the language from regional to global, these people don't use words randomly, right? It's not word salad that Iranians produce. They're very precise. And so global means the empire will be hit in places it doesn't expect to be hit, and maybe in those places that it has demilitarized in order to bring what little is left of its ammunition that it cannot replenish, because you have to do just-in-time lean factories so as to maximize shareholder value. And this is where the vulnerability is materially and psychologically. The fact that a weakened actor like Somalia is saying we're joining the fact is extremely significant. Again, as a psychologist, I think about the last days of those narcissistic relationships, family systems. You see folks who had kind of, agreed to the domination because they couldn't do anything else, starting to peel off. And they peel off one by one, and once they peel off, they don't come back. And I wanted to address the question of our friend Sun, and I forget the handle. What do I think the reaction of the US will be? And now you can show the image I asked you to put up again, right? The reaction of the US court to successful decolonization. It's not just decolonization, and Bikram Gill, explained it. It's anti-imperialist. They are going, the empire is forcing Iran to loosen the empire's grip on the one lock that they have on the world economy through their lock on this very strategic energy-producing region in a world that is still very much dependent on fossil fuels and oil. So the way they will respond is the way you see Trump responded today, and the Iranian embassies, oh my God, they are amazing. So you see this thing. So this is from Donald Trump.
Yeah, they said TLDR, basically.
Right, TLDR. They said, did anybody in the world read this thing? Is it about us? This is how they will respond. They will just blab around. They will say, I don't think anybody in the world thought Trump could read so many and could write, let alone read so many paragraphs.
And in the comments,
right?
people are sort of like talking to them, and I mean, in native language as well. And then they're like, no, they're talking about India and like whatever. But nobody's reading that. And then Adnan is talking about.
But this is what they will do. They will just blabber on until everybody goes, I ain't reading all this. Free Palestine, free Iran, free the world, land back in the US. There is this drive in the empire. Everybody is always trying to go, okay, so what's the next step in their 5D chess? Maybe they will fall back onto the Western Hemisphere and then they will lash out. But you're already seeing Mexico pre-loved. You're already seeing, we're seeing today that Venezuela is not in the US camp as much as we thought it was. So it won't stop until it doesn't have any weapons anymore, any ammunition. All it has is big, long tweets that nobody will read. And this is.
And I'll tell you like what
going to be the reaction.
What 5D chess is. 5D chess is when you flip over the board and you go home. Chess is a 2D game. Like if you start playing it in other dimensions, you've just knocked the board over. And it's an important point that Navid said about Somalia, because you could say and they have sent 2 ships out there and so on. That's successful because that has raised insurance premiums. And that's like actually all the empire feels. And what Adnan was saying about this being a region, like there's this book, Monsoon, which is like suspect in different ways. But at that point, the Americans were thinking that this is a region and we need to pivot to this region. What's happening now is they're completely losing this region. So the monsoon system is such that like if you lose a shoe in Bahrain at the right time, it'll end up in Sri Lanka. Like we have coins from there and they have stuff from us. It's a loop, including Africa as well. It's like a Mediterranean in that like the weather system, the wind system allows us to be quite connected. And a lot of the sailors at the time were Tamil and so on. And when Zheng He came from China, the plaques he left here were written in Persian and Tamil because that was like a coherent, quite established network. And that's kind of like reestablishing itself now. Adnan was talking about natural sovereignty, and that's being established. So America, which honestly has nothing to do with this region, was able to establish power here in a very low-cost way, basically zero cost. In fact, it was just profit for them. And they were able to just ship stuff and control stuff through dollars, and then that's all. They've lost that. So now they're trying to kind of force it through aircraft carriers and destroyers and hijacking this and that ship. That is not a long-term strategy. That is just a media and a market manipulation strategy, but that's not a market creating strategy. That's not a narrative creating strategy. I was talking about how the word of the president used to like mean something. Our daughter, we're trying to like introduce her to the news slowly, and like, wait, we can't show her anything from a US president because not because like we disagree with it, but because it's too vulgar. Like I think he's the first president to use like the F word. So that was a soft power way of controlling things that really had nothing to do with you, but just because people sort of trusted you and could maybe show your statements to their kids, and that's gone. So like my kids, that generation thinks the US president is a joke. Like they think evil and a joke, and that's lost. So you can try and move the markets in the short term a little bit with your aircraft carriers, which have like the toilets exploding and you're feeding the people like bricks and shoe leather. That's not a sustainable strategy. The best empire is when you kind of can do it through bureaucracy and through like standing off and through insurance and like all this other invisible stuff. Once the empire becomes visible, then that's a Humpty Dumpty situation. And all the king's horsepower and all the king's men can't put that dumpster fire back together again.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say a couple of things. So first of all, to this point about like the reassertion of sovereignty in the region, right? We're seeing I feel like we're seeing new resistance groups pop up pretty consistently lately. Like there's a resistance group that was conducting operations from Syria, right? Like, and people basically wrote off Syria, which I don't think by any means people should write off Syria at this point. And like there are resistance groups in Sudan. So for example, we all know that in Sudan, the primary combatants are the rapid support forces, which are supported by the UAE and the Zionists, of course, versus the Sudanese armed forces, the government, which is supported by the people. The Sudanese armed forces have been supported by Iran, but they've also been supported by Saudi, for example, right? So they've the SAF has taken a little bit of a measured approach to what's going on with respect to the war against Iran. But there are smaller resistance formations that are non-state actors that are sort of that are kind of becoming integrated within the Sudanese state that have taken a very pro-Iran position, right? And so the reason why I'm bringing that up is to say that Iran has historically thrived in cultivating non-state resistance actors in West Asia. If you think about Hezbollah, if you think about the popular mobilization forces, Ansar Allah, which has a modicum of state power right now, all these forces are non-state actors. And so if we're witnessing the emergence of non-state actors in East Africa as well, what does that portend for what's going to happen as well in that respect? The other thing I want to say really quick, so I actually did read that statement that was posted by Trump today, and I actually read it kind of closely. And first of all, Trump didn't write that. It was I think it was written by some like Republican from California, and as part of the statement, taking a clear anti-immigrant position, particularly like against Indian and Chinese immigrants, vis-a-vis like the tech industry or whatever, which is like an interesting position to take, and shows me that it's a MAGA position and not like a neocon whatever position. The other aspect of that statement was that like the person said that the ACLU has been like far more dangerous force for the people of the United States and for the country than Iran ever has been, which again shows me that's a MAGA position. But all this to say, and this kind of gets to the question that was asked in the chat, which is that I think this disagreement between the MAGAs and the neocons is a reflection of the reality of a declining empire that is limited in its range of options, right? Because the MAGAs thought that they were supporting Trump because he was going to consolidate power and sort of withdraw from like these international obligations and international wars in many respects. But in fact, he came to power and he doubled down on all that. And I think he doubled down on all that because in many respects, I think there's a lack of range of options in what's going on. But like in doing so, it's created an even greater fulcrum within the conservatives of this country, right? And so that is sort of I would say an acceleration of decline. But of course, what that also means is, especially for the people in this part of the world and specifically within this country, is that there is going to be greater violence and repression. And so it's incumbent upon people to therefore get organized to defend themselves, right? Like, and to defend their communities. And I think we are witnessing that in places like Los Angeles and Minneapolis and so on. But that has to continue because these attacks are going to just continue to ramp up, right? And so I think this consolidation that we're witnessing, that is a failed effort at consolidation, they might revamp it moving forward.
Yeah, you guys, I'll have to go in about 5 minutes to drop off my kids. I just want to follow up on something Navid said about this sort of betrayal of the MAGA folk. So one of my friend's families is MAGA, lovely people actually, but they're like, I was asking him like, how do they process this? And he was like, they don't. They just like don't. But I think what's happened with the conservatives is what happened with liberals with Obama, whereas they elected someone expecting one thing and then that was betrayed, and then now the conservatives elected someone expecting one thing and then that was betrayed. So again, it's like boiling water, right? Like elections, like politics, that's there to sort of relieve pressure. It's like a pressure cooker. It's there to just like let the pressure out. Now they know that there's no pressure release through this electoral system. So that pressure is just going to build. And what Navid is saying about defending yourselves and your community is correct. Like the US has a Second Amendment for this reason. It's not actually to like have a collection of 100 AR-15s that your like kid shoots themselves with. It's like you're supposed to have a militia to sort of defend your state. And what I hope for the United States is that they take their own advice and then they, overthrow their governments. And then the United States is designed to break up into states. And we to break up the United States. I think I've died. I started putting America in scare quotes because I also think it's a temporary entity like Israel. But I think it has to break apart, not just as an empire, but as a sort of continental empire as well. God willing, it would be land back to the people that actually care for it. But it's got to go, and it's going to go, because with all this, as for my final thoughts, when we talk about sort of like the economic pressure, the economic time bomb that's already gone off for people in, say, Sri Lanka, Philippines, even Japan, I'm actually not as worried about us because A, we've kind of done something about it already. We started preparing from the first day it happened, and because we've gone through this before and we're kind of like used to hardship. But what I want to tell Americans is that the only ship coming in for you now is hardship, and you're not used to it. You're a more fragile society. And I mean, to be honest, I feel bad because some people comment to be like, well, I'm American and I live like shit, which is true. But I also feel good about it because you got it coming. Like this thing has to break apart. Even the petty privileges that the petty bourgeois have had have been on the backs of a lot of blood and a lot of suffering. And look, it didn't have to be this way. Like everybody in the world, Iran, Venezuela, everybody would have happily traded with America, even despite its past sins, even despite enacting the worst genocide in the world on its own continent, even despite enslaving people from Africa, even despite suppressing every liberation movement they could across the world, people would have still traded with America. But they had to go out like this, and so they are going to go out. And I mean, I'm happy about it. I think Pharaoh's got it coming. As somebody was saying in the comments, 10 plagues. So I mean, I think I don't know. I must be 10 now. It's 9. There's maybe one more, but you got it coming. And now I have to go drop off my kids. But thank you very much. And if I have a final comment, I would be go through Adnan's backlog here. I've been doing some walking around here because we can't use diesel as much, and it's been really great. You should like the Abu Sital one is fantastic, and the Light Maruf one. These are fantastic. These are really sort of mind bending, ideologically orienting conversations that you're lucky. I'm lucky to be a part of, and you're lucky to be a part of just by listening.
That's really kind. Thanks so much, Indi, for all these wonderful reflections and comments. And of course, it's very nice to hear that, you know, even the other programs you find, you know, useful. I'm looking forward to our conversation coming soon.
I got a lot of time on my hands, man. I'm walking around, and you guys are gonna be walking too. So you better just download some podcasts.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you know, after all of these significant discussions, maybe it's time for something a little lighter as well that we could discuss while we're thinking of what other issues we want to bring up, and a lot of great, you know, things happening there in the chat. But I wanted to, you know, somebody had mentioned very early on, you know, about Reza Pahlavi's activities recently, and you know, this he's in Germany. He seems to spend an awful lot of time in Europe, you know, and in fact, actually, I think he made some rather interesting comments with some German pranksters that I want to come back to after we watch this video, this very brief video. This is something that happened very recently. I can't remember if it was today or yesterday, but here we go. Okay, just for good measure, we'll see that part again. Okay, so he got bathed in a little bit of tomato sauce there, and you know, he had a lot of security around him, but
I don't know if you guys know, like, the reason, you all know like the background with the tomato sauce or whatever, or?
No, but I want you to tell us about that. But I just want to say that, like, I tweeted about this, and all I said was they were just trying to give him his Red Crusader cross. Because of course the German pranksters, you know, did this interview with him where they were trying to kind of tell him that they were going to help, you know, bring Germany on board for kind of military attack upon Iran. And he happened to say during that it would be wonderful if, like, Germany would also join this crusade. Okay, so being the medievalist and always having to bring up the crusade, that was of course noteworthy. And so I, you know, the red slash, you know, like I was just trying to kind of characterize the crusader. It was just they're just trying to reveal and give him his cross. But anyway, tell us about the tomatoes.
So there's this meme of him like where like he like in Iran he's known to like have the face of like that is similar to the logo of a ketchup bottle that is sold in Iran, like, and it's like a bear, like the face of a bear. So they made a meme of his face on that ketchup bottle, and so that's why like the tomato sauce, which it's tomato sauce, not ketchup, but like that's kind of where it comes from. I can find the meme and put it in the chat. But yeah, that's it.
I think I've seen that on Twitter somewhere recently in response to this, like, that they brought back that meme. But I think also, what's the political significance here? I think this also deserves some further interpretation in the sense that, nobody's on board with this. I mean, people across the world are, not in favor of this war. They recognize and understand that this pathetic figure has actually been involved in sowing so much discord, chaos, economic disruption, and deprivation across the world, and that he should really be humiliated and discredited in every way possible wherever he goes. And we have to contrast this kind of like wry, funny attempt at showing disapproval and debasement with a harmless spray of like tomato sauce that everybody around him acts as if he's under like some complete assault and attack, and security immediately attacks these people and he's whisked away, so that he's not further subject to this dangerous tomato sauce. And compare that with just today or yesterday, I can't remember, I was just reading about it today, a Pahlavist, insane fascist thug, killed an anti-Iran war activist, right? Murdered them, right? So this is kind of like the thing that we're dealing with, is that there is a small group of extremists who are operating in the imperial core to try and leverage total violence of the empire against their own people, because they have a supremacist ideology that's totally parallel to Zionist supremacism, that's totally parallel to, Western white supremacism. And in fact, it actually is a species of that, because they want to fancy themselves as, the Aryans, and as the true white, kind of, people. And what is involved here is just so much circulation of rank Islamophobia. Like, it only makes sense and works because there is this ambient Islamophobia that can constantly be drawn upon to demonize Iran, to demonize the Palestinians, and on and on and on. And so this is some of the reflections I had about it, but I think there are other meanings that we might, pull out from this kind of light-hearted kind of episode that we can all enjoy watching him, bathed in.
I understand. Also, I understand ketchup pizza is a specialty in Iran. I dread to think of it because ketchup is one of my bugbears. But anyway, I was just thinking, when we talk about this inflection point and the flip side of accusation being that, every accusation by the empire is a confession, is that what they actually wished to visit on their enemies, now that the inflection point has been reached and that they are the subject, the object of history and not the subject anymore. Now it's, the axis of resistance that is the subject, and white empire that is the object, is what is going to happen in white empire. And today, Michael Hudson was on Nima's Dialogue Works show, and he said something very interesting. He said that the #1 US exports for the past 5 months straight is gold. It's not AI, it's not weapons, it's not oil. It's gold to Switzerland, Hong Kong, China. And you have to remember that the US went off gold in 71 precisely because the French were starting to get a lot of gold out of the war in Indochina, being still positioned there. And the problem is it's the US itself. And Indi said it, I think, on this show last time, that they are literally, it's a fire sale. It is a fire sale of empire, and what they will get is exactly what they are wishing to visit on Iran. They will get civil war, they will get societal collapse, because there will be nothing else. You know, I know some people in the chat are saying they are going to turn extremely violent on the US population, but you have to remember that those ICE thugs were actually recruited by, offering them, $150,000 a year or something. And once all the gold is gone, once everything, international trade is done in yuan, there will be nothing left to pay for those folks. So you will have inflation through the roof, and those $150,000 will be worth nothing. And then you will see the agents of imperial violence peel away inside the empire itself. And we always need to remember that. I think the mainland US of KKA has got what, is it like 4, 5 firearms per person inside the country? So I would venture to, I don't know if it's a prediction, but to think that it's not out of the range of possibilities that the collapse will be on a scale that nobody can imagine. And White Power was saying this yesterday in our conversation, is that, the market prices things in. Well, the market prices things in on the idea that things will go back to equilibrium, but there is no equilibrium left to be had when you do such a shock to the system. And those societies that are most integrated into what used to be the global imperial economy are the ones that will get hit the hardest. And I think the fact that the US is selling so much gold at this moment means that folks are smelling the coffee, right? Because otherwise they would, I remember having a conversation with Ali Kadri just before the war started, and he said, my big fear is it will be like in the past. So all the money will go to the US for safekeeping, because that's what happens when there's a war. Everybody goes and buy US treasuries. What ain't happening this time? The US has to sell gold just to stay afloat. And they've now amassed, twice as much military assets near Iran than they did for round one. And they literally are going to shoot their last wad, because there is something in the dynamics, in the dialectics of the system, that really compels it to commit suicide by axis of resistance. And it's going to be suicide, like there won't be anything left of this proudest of all proud empires, this most lethal military force in the world, this most exceptional of all nations, will just be a sad and unmissed memory before you know it.
So I just quickly want to say regarding Pahlavi and the Iranian kind of like I would say, the fascist group of people, which is is not at all representative, of course, of like the entire Iranian population around the world outside of Iran. But these people are opportunists. They're complete opportunists. They would no doubt be more than willing to sell off the country for their own personal interests, right? And that's exactly why they exist in the first place. They are supported by the United States and by the West, just as like the Cuban exile population is supported as a way to weaponize against the Cuban state and Cuban people. And in this respect, like, you know, they are. It's interesting to see that, like, you know, a lot of like the case that they've been making, these folks, are based on moral appeals and, like, you know, like all this ethical stuff about how women are mistreated in Iran, and all you know, all this nonsense that is not supported in any material fashion. And yet now that, you know, that all this stuff is happening, particularly since Alexa Flood, we see what they really are, which is basically Zionists. I mean, they're Zionists who happen to be Iranian. You know, that's the, you know, that's the only difference between them and these and the European Zionists, or the, you know, the Western Zionists, right? So they will, you know, they are not an historical agent that has any sense of like initiative on its own. And if and when the United States withdraws from the region, these forces will have nothing to stand on anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely the case, that the weakening of U.S. control, which has already happened, you know, like, and we will see it much more clearly once, you know, this war definitively ends and the U.S. has to withdraw and pull its forces out, that these bases in the Gulf are unlikely to be rebuilt, that even the UAE sees that, and we're talking about the UAE, basically an extension of the Zionist entity in the Gulf. Even the UAE doesn't see strategic value in the bases. You know, they've been talking. There was like a kind of key commentator who's very close to the Zayed family. You know, the family in charge of Abu Dhabi, and leaders of the UAE. You know, talking about how there's no real value to having the U.S. Physical presence and infrastructure in the UAE, that they might, you know, have to kind of start trading in yuan for their oil, given like these realities, but that they should buy like top U.S. weapons, with this kind of fantasy that they might be able to defend themselves, because they've recognized that despite all of their loyal support for the Zionist entity against their neighbors in the region, that nonetheless they were not valued when it came to prioritizing security, and that they were just seen as, you know, a kind of outpost for you know, defense radar and targeting systems to defend the Zionist colony, and that they were, you know, human shields of a sort themselves, you know, and all of that. So, but that isn't enough necessarily to get them to reintegrate into the region. They're still holding on to these kind of fantasies that they might be able to, you know, purchase U.S. Military equipment and so on. But, you know, it shows that like there are some realities that even they are having to recognize, because the material conditions have changed so totally. And we will see that there is a fraying and an unraveling of a lot of the artificially supported kind of conditions and groups. You know, will the kind of Takfiri jihadis in Syria actually survive, you know, in the future? Like, we're already seeing resistance starting to take place. You know, they've been propped up and put in these kind of false positions, all these GCC countries as well. And this is something, again, Syed Mohammed Marandi keeps saying, is that it's getting hot. If they reopen the war and there's attack on their civilian infrastructure, like their energy, you know, resources, their desalination plants, these colonies are unlivable. And they are colonies because most of the population are there either as low-wage, indentured, you know, practically slave labor, building and providing the services, or it's these expats who are living a kind of false, you know, position in life, you know, in these little enclaves. And it's going to be unsupportable and unsustainable for them to continue to do so if there's no air conditioning and, there's no fresh water because desalination is not taking place, right? So these are, fake countries that have been kind of inflated and propped up because of their position within the empire. And if the empire recedes and retracts, then they evaporate. They can't be sustainable. They're in a false position, materially speaking. And so there will be a lot of political and economic consequences. They have put, the Greater Israel Project out there to try and undermine the idea that, the Sykes-Picot colonial borders, need to be established. They have raised that. What they're going to get as a consequence of trying to, expand and so on is in fact actually that there is going to be realignment, and those borders aren't going to mean as much, even if they're still kind of maintained because there's some nation state. The realities of regional cooperation are possible that will make these kind of divisions so much less significant and important as mechanisms for dividing, the region. So that's all possible with the weakening of U.S. empire. And that's what we're seeing happening slowly but surely. All of the consequences have not yet appeared, and they can be contested. There's a lot of things that can change and happen, but the trend and the direction here is toward weakening of U.S. empire, strengthening of the peoples of the region in their sovereignty, and that spells, a lot of potential changes in the future of West Asia and the wider region that it's a part of, as we were talking about with the Indian Ocean and East Africa and so forth.
And it's uncanny how you see I think it was first ISIS, which is the empire's foreign legion, that raised getting rid of Sykes-Picot, if I remember, and then next the Zionists pushed it, and they are going to get it, but not in the way they thought. There was Leif Marouf was today a very good interview on Radika, on friend of our shows, Radika Desai's geopolitical economist YouTube. Please watch it, because it's left going into the deep stuff. And so he said those are, he was talking about Lebanon and Palestine and Syria, and he was saying those are just like artificial borders that were imposed. They tried to create this Christian state. The French tried to create the Christian state to help with the Jewish colony in Palestine, but this was always kind of a fiction of empire, and there is no reason why it should survive any longer than fiction. And something very important Lev said also, and this is a subject we've touched on this show, but not so much tonight, and you will discuss with our brother Indi next week, but the role of religion and the role of Islam in all this as a material force, right? And Leif was very interesting about it today also, where he said, well, I'm secular, but, I would never take the religion away. I can see the role of religion, and they chose to make it a religious war, right? They decided that they were Judaism, and they colonized all of the Jewish institutions throughout the world. It's 97% genocidal Zionist capture of all Jewish organizations the world over. So, am I going to go to Gaza and tell the folks who still say we thank Allah for everything He's given us in the middle of being genocided? Oh no, religion is stupid. You should let this go. No, I'm seeing it as a very important force. And there's been this campaign, very much Zionist driven, but in a white empire driven, of absolute demonization of Islam, right? When I was a kid growing up in the 60s, 70s in France, there was anti-Arab racism so thick you could cut it with a knife and bring it home. But it wasn't Islamophobic. That came around the turn of the 80s, and all the left fell for this nonsense of, Islam is anti-feminist, and then after 79, the Mullah regime, they just want to bring everybody back to the Middle Ages. And now what we're seeing is how Iran has captured the narrative, like watch, if you can, the CNN interview with the explosive media guys, the Lego movie guys, because what the CNN people are most stunned by is how savvy they are, how, down with the culture they are, how they know all the codes of white empire, whereas nobody knows anything about Iran, to be frank. Miranda keeps on saying, read this book, Going to Tehran. And I bought it like a year ago, and I read maybe 3 to 4 chapters of them. But most of us are blissfully ignorant of Iran, and I'm one of those people. I'm trying to learn, but I'm still very ignorant. And it's this feature of white empire that is causing its demise. And I don't know if you guys saw this, and mileage may vary, as they say, but even Tucker Carlson yesterday said the Muslim world is morally superior to the West. So when a Christian nationalist comes out with this sort of stuff, and maybe, he has some ulterior motive behind it, but can anybody in the West, whether right or left, imagine anyone of any stature saying this publicly from the belly of the beast, like 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, and being listened to? And this is another sign of things getting inverted. And, where Sharia law, the idea of Sharia law used to be this bogeyman that you scare kids at night, go to bed and brush your teeth, or we'll have Sharia law in this house, is now, oh, wait a minute, it's actually the Muslim morality is morally superior to what we have in the West. So, on the psychological front, those are not straws in the wind. Those are the signs of an absolute sea change that will, along with the material changes, change pretty much everything.
Yeah, I'm looking for, I would say that you can have imperial compatible Islam, look at these Takfiris, that were part of, the Cold War, a Cold War tool for anti-communist, violence, and, what we see in Syria and so on. But I think what's been important in the Palestinian resistance struggle and in post-revolutionary Iran's kind of influence on Shi'i theology that transformed from, a kind of historic, apolitical kind of, let's wait for the Mahdi, the 12th Imam to return, but now became part of an active revolutionary preparation, like intizar. There's passive intizar, or waiting, and there's active intizar. So this idea of active intizar is we're waiting for the Mahdi, but we're working towards it, right? So they transformed all of the concepts of Shi'i martyrdom, of the Tazia, the grief for the martyrdom of Hussein, the intizar for the Mahdi, every component of Shi'i theology that may have in the past been used to reconcile oneself to these unfortunate conditions, but we can't do anything about it right now, that they transformed all of them into revolutionary struggle, right? The meanings were transformed. That's the kind of Islam that is now, I just had this, we just had this talk at my university by somebody who wrote a book called Waning Crescent, the rise and fall of global Islam, meaning Islam as a subject of history, and I thought, what could be the worst time in the world to have published such a book? Okay, that is today, is the worst time. I'm sure, okay, like the incubation period for an academic book, because it takes so long. So they were writing, in the 2010s, near the end of the 2010s and maybe the beginning of the 2020s, and thinking about, basically what's happened with those imperialist, kind of ISIS, Al-Qaeda, etc., and that it had reached a kind of end point. Perhaps that's the only excuse I can give them, because this is the time when Islam has become a subject of history. And it's not just one, it's a contested, kind of way of thinking about it. There's a revolutionary interpretation and understanding, but it is being used at present as a resource in reimagining how to achieve peace, justice, equality, the end of empire. And as a result, it is like the subject of history right now when we talk about the importance of Gaza as the kind of world historical and world transforming kind of moment. We did this 8-part series, me and my colleague, Ariel Salzman, that unfortunately I didn't get a whole lot of, not many people have watched that. I think there was some really interesting things in there. And what we were trying to say is Palestine in the world, right? You cannot understand the world if you don't understand Palestine and its place in it, because it is showing us, what is going to be the lines of battle in this phase of history that we're in now, in the era of the genocide. Obviously you can't understand Gaza and the resistance in Gaza without, thinking through the importance and significance of their adoption and commitment to Islam and Muslim values as a frame through which they conceive their struggle. So I do think I'm looking forward. I'm hoping to actually have somebody come on, an expert. I've got, some feelers out to try and get Hussein Makki, who is a Shi'i, scholar and theologian, to kind of go more deeply into the way in which these kind of aspects of Shi'i religious thought and practice were revitalized in a revolutionary direction, and how that works now. And I think that is important knowledge for everyone. And the fact is so another something that Sayyid Muhammad Marandi says that reminds me actually of what Malcolm X used to say, is that you don't understand us and you just create these fictional, fantastical projections of us, but we know you very well. We have to know you. We know ourselves and we know you. We have this kind of intimate knowledge of you because we're forced to know about you, because we have to live as subalterns in your world. But you don't know anything about us and what we actually think. You project things about us. And that's why you will fail, because you are not dealing with reality. So it's the same kind of thing we were saying before. We don't know anything about, people don't know about, they didn't anticipate and think that the assassination of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei would, far from being the moment of the collapse of the Islamic Republic of Iran, would be its revolutionary revitalization. I mean, that's what it ended up. But if you understood something about Shi'i martyrdom and about, what it might mean to people, then they might have had some kind of sense of caution that this racist kind of idea that, if we just take out your leaders, your society will collapse, because you don't have a system, you don't have organized life, you don't have institutions, you don't have genuine ideological commitments, you have maybe fake or false, kind of beliefs that once punctured, everything else will just fall apart. I mean, that's the fallacy. And that's why I like to say that this is a time of reciprocity, because what it is the insistence by Iran, by the resistance, that our lives matter just as much, that we will, force you to deal with us as equals. We will not be subordinates and subservient, and we will force you to recognize reality. Right? I think that's what this principle of reciprocity is about, is countering the racist, supremacist doctrines of the way in which the empire sees the world, and making that unsustainable, impossible to continue. But anyway, I don't know, maybe it's kind of time for a final wrap-up round of thoughts and conclusions about this moment and this period. I mean, we haven't talked about a lot of issues. We could have talked more about the Lebanon front. We could talk about these new threats on Turkey. Why, what's happening with this, and also about like the Navy secretary being fired. You know, it's just one more example of, you know, this kind of disarray inside, you know, the imperial military machine. So any of those or other things that, you know, we haven't had a chance to discuss, I think now is a good time, you know, to raise and make a statement over as we're moving towards a, you know, conclusion for this edition. And of course, before we get to the all important and necessary Lego video watch collectively for this week's, you know, special Lego presentation. So any other, you know, kind of concluding thoughts you'd want to make about topics maybe we haven't raised?
Yeah, I'll just say, you know, I guess a couple things. I actually want to pick back up on the analysis of like the Gulf countries. And, you know, I think you all have like cited Marandi multiple times, and correctly so. One of the things that he said, I think like a couple weeks ago now, April 7th, I believe is when he said this, is that Iran is no longer going to tolerate any countries that are going to be subservient to Zionism in the region anymore. The reality has changed. So UAE, like this existence of the UAE where they're going to be subservient to Zionism, Bahrain where they're going to be subservient to Zionism, this is no longer going to be the reality. If that's what they're going to, if that's the leg they want to stand on, they're not going to survive much longer. And I actually think, and this is just a prediction, we'll see if it comes true or not, one of, if not the first dominoes to fall will be these countries, UAE, Bahrain, maybe Kuwait as well. These countries, you know, I think, Adnan, you're correct. Like, you know, the UAE is like sort of waffling back and forth about whether these bases are good for the country. I think Qatar and Saudi have come to a more definitive conclusion about that. But what options does UAE have? Like, you know, they are totally in bed with Zionism to the extent, like, you know, some of us, we joke around, we call them the UZE, the United Zionist Emirates, right? So like, you know, they don't have popular support. They don't even really have an indigenous population. They used to be part of Oman. You know, some of us also joke, make UAE Oman again, right? So like, these are the realities that the UAE faces. It's built on like, you know, attracting like luxury. You know, Habibi come to Dubai. You know, all these things. You know, like, people are leaving Dubai. Like, you know, they're leaving Dubai just like the settlers are leaving, you know, occupied Palestine. You know, this is the reality. This is the reality. So like, what do they have to stand on at this point? They're, you know, the proxy wars that they're fighting in East Africa, you know, what's going to happen as they continue to suffer these losses on their own territory with respect to Iran. And so, you know, all that to say that I don't, you know, I'm like, these countries are, you know, if we talk about imperialism as a paper tiger, this is like the paper tiger within the paper tiger, right? Like, you know, it's a house of cards and it's going to fall apart quickly. I will say though, like, I think there was a meeting between Saudi, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt a couple of days ago. And so they seem to be like trying to develop a new security umbrella for the region, because they see that the United States security umbrella is in fact not a real security umbrella. It's a security umbrella for U.S. Zionist interests, right? And so it seems like they're trying to develop a framework for a new security umbrella. I don't know how that's going to work out for them. You know, Turkey, like, we're talking about like a hodgepodge of interests here. Turkey is part of NATO, and as long as they're part of NATO, then, you know, like, I think it's going to be totally different from, like, you know, even a situation like Pakistan. Pakistan was close with China. We haven't even talked about China, and I think there's a lot to say about China as well. So there's all this, right? There's all this. The other thing I'll say two more quick things. Like, I think with respect to like what you all talked about with respect to religion and Islam, and I want to open by saying, like, I'm by no means a religious expert, but I think, Adnan, you're fundamentally correct in saying that, like, Islam, like any other religion, is you run the gamut of various ideologies, various philosophies within Islam, right? And I'm not even talking about Sunni, Shia, you know, and these kinds of things. I'm talking about like within these formations as well. But what I'm seeing as a major distinction, that, as you're pointing out, Adnan, with like the axis of resistance, is that there seems to be an application of Islam in a materialist fashion, in a dialectical and historical materialist fashion, that allows the resistance to activate from Islam, from their religious beliefs to fight against imperialism. That is different than, as you point out, like that's Takfiris, right? Like, so I think that's important to point out. The last thing I'll say, and I want to say this about Lebanon, this is obviously a major front in the war. We are witnessing, of course, like a genocide and scorched earth that's taking place in South Lebanon right now. But I will say, like, Hezbollah, as we said before, Hezbollah continues to respond, and I want to point out that I want to repeat this like anywhere I can. The Zionists said that they had basically eradicated and eliminated Hezbollah. And now Hezbollah is acting in a stronger fashion than it did even in 2024, right? And the reason why I want to bring that up is because the Zionists told their public, they told their very own settlers in the north that they had essentially eliminated Hezbollah, right? If I'm the resistance, I'm putting out messaging every possible opportunity to say, your government told you this, your entity told you this, and yet we're still here and we're still fighting, and you all are still like scared of our missiles and scared of our drones, right? So in other words, you cannot believe anything your own government says, and your own government either they totally miscalculated our strength, or they flat out lied to you. Neither one makes them look good. So leave northern occupied Palestine and leave Palestine in general. So I'll end there.
Yeah, it's actually both. They lied and they miscalculated. I remember leaving a chat room when some fake leftist was talking about the fall of Hezbollah. I thought, I've had enough of this nonsense. But yeah, I really resonated with what you said about religions, that they run the gamut, and it's exactly the same with Marxism, isn't it? It runs the gamut from dialectical materialist, revolutionary, anti-imperialist, and anti-colonial, all the way to what our friend Gabriel Rockhill now calls Imperial Marxism, which I think is a much better moniker for it than Western Marxism, right? So yeah, I can relate to this. So, the question of dialectical materialism has always been the link between matter and that emergent property of consciousness. And consciousness in a feedback loop can actually change matter. And depending on the situation, matter will become more important in determining what is possible, and consciousness can also have an impact on changing those possibilities, right? At the end of the day, you need to keep the two in mind, and it's the meaning of praxis. You do something in the material world that you've thought about, and then you look at the result, and then you change how you think, so you make mistakes all the time, and you progress in this particular way. And of course, the main difficulty we faced, those of us who identify with the dialectical materialist revolutionary movement writ large all over the world, is the question of developing the kind of consciousness that can turn into a material force that can actually upend the relations of production, the capitalist and the imperialist relations of production. And I remember it was in the 80s where it seemed to us, and it seemed to me for a while, that the bourgeoisie was much better at developing its own class consciousness, a group, like almost a hive mind of its own class interest that it could establish, sometimes through conspiracies, but most times by just, being conscious of its class interests. And I remember this quote from Warren Buffett, who said, yes, there is a class war, but my class won it. But actually, I don't think it did. Because now we are seeing again this inversion, this inflection point where the class consciousness of the world bourgeoisie, of the imperialist, has become, it actually hates reality. There was this great quote, I think it's Ron Susskind, didn't say who it was, but it's attributed to Karl Rove, about you're reality-based, but we create our own reality. There is Peter Thiel saying trans people are not trans enough. You should transition out of humanity, which again is a sign of hatred for humanity. And then Elon Musk, offering as an horizon colonizing. Hey, why colonizing Mars once we've destroyed life on Earth? And these people hate reality so much that they will never connect back to reality. They cannot do it because their own class consciousness is based on denying reality. They've deindustrialized their core because they've jumped into the world of narratives like derivatives, futures, swaps. All these financial instruments are extremely sophisticated pieces of narrative engineering that, work so well to extract value in the short term that they will give you the illusion that they can free themselves from the constraints of the matter, the laws of thermodynamics, as Warwick Powell would say, that are the base of them. And so you get the empire doing what? You get the empire literally destroying the one thing on which its power is based, which is that lock over the oil in West Asia. I mean, when you think about it, it's like the ultimate insult to reality, to the material basis of their power. And they have to destroy it because, the dynamics, psychological, but also material dynamics of it, is to abstract yourself, to free yourself from the constraints of reality. And there's absolute contempt for reality, which was in this quote. But you see, in the bullshit they produce, right, in the amorality that they come out with, everybody knows humans can't live if our ruling class is about eating babies and selling their own children for sex trafficking. And everybody knows this is an insult to the reality of what it means to be a human amongst many other humans and amongst many other human communities. So I think their class consciousness has actually fractured to the point of being irrecoverable, and they will keep on doubling, tripling down, because that's all they can do, into this, retreating into this imaginary world. And on the other side of this, because nature abhors a void, and dialectical contradictions are always have the two poles, you have this emergence of this international class consciousness organized around common humanity, around recognizing one another's right to self-determination. And this is what China is holding. And this is actually what Iran also is holding for everybody. And even Russia, Russia decided that Holocaust Remembrance Day would be a day of remembrance for the genocide of the Russian population, which, had 27 million dead to this Western project of colonizing and genociding them that was richly financed by US capital, by the way. And of course, the Zionists are going apeshit about it because it's desecrating their precious, accession to whiteness, as Jewish people finally acceded to whiteness. If you mix millions of Slavs into the pot of remembering. So it's all going to hell in a handbasket for them, but it isn't for humanity. And I think we have to stand in our common humanity, as Iran is showing us, as China is showing us, as the free person of the world inside the heart of each and every one of us will tell us, if we only listen to it.
Well, I think we're just about ready for a Lego video and final conclusion, but I do want to say that the Lebanon front, we didn't get a chance to talk about it as extensively as we could have, and thank Navid for some of those, analyses of what's going on there. But if you want to get into more detail, I did discuss with Hussein Asaf of Vocal Politics, who's based in Lebanon, about the situation there, and reconfirming as well the fact that Hezbollah remains undefeated. It was never defeated, really, but decided to accept a ceasefire, mostly for domestic political kind of complications. But the cycle has continued, and they are actually in a much stronger position, as we've seen by the failures to take any real territory, and actually Israel needing the ceasefire, that they agreed to eventually, which they continued to violate. But they needed the break, from pretending that they were going to make an invasion on Lebanon that they never were able to actually, amount. So anyway, you can check that out on the channel for quite recently. And here, there's something mentioning about, Western oligarchs keep thinking they'll get consciousness out of technology because they don't have it themselves, and make sure the poor never develop class consciousness. And I will be speaking tomorrow morning live as well with Dwayne Monroe, Marxist technologist, and we'll be talking about this insane, ridiculous manifesto about the technological republic that Palantir put out based on the book that, for some unknown reason is a New York Times seller, but for the known reason is that it's expressing the ideology.
It's market manipulation, like all the rest of it.
Possibly, indeed, but by the tech oligarchs. But so we will break down that, manifesto and talk a little bit about AI and fascism in the reality, which is the technological empire. It's not a technological republic, but like so many republics, they were actually ways of reinscribing settler colonial class hegemony. These republics, the US is a republic, a lot of the, planter republics, in Latin America, it's just what you do when you break away from the colonial empires. You call it a republic so that you can, perpetuate settler colonial control. So anyway, we'll be talking a little bit about that. So join us for those tomorrow. And of course, I think Anti-Imperialist Scholars Collective has a podcast, and they are having, Navid, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what's upcoming there tomorrow.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Adnan. Yeah, we're having a podcast, a live stream tomorrow at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And we're going to talk more about West Asia. And I think Nina's going to be joining me, and I think Diego's going to be there as well. Maybe somebody else. I don't remember, but yeah, at least the three of us. And so we'll be having a good discussion about, probably like a continuation of discussion tonight. So
right. So check that out, 3 p.m. tomorrow. They have a channel. Go subscribe to that channel and watch that tomorrow. And of course, you also have to be subscribing to, and we're streaming on Substack on the Resistance is Fertile podcast.substack.com as well. And so much great content and wonderful discussions happening there with Indi and Benji.
Every Monday, 9:30, live every Monday, 9:30 a.m. ET.
And lastly, I just want to, so be there. Last thing, I just want to remind everybody, I've been putting in the chat little reminders, is just, if you can, we're now at 17,150. So we've raised a few $100 in the course of this live stream. And I see people who I recognize from the chat who are making donations. I want to thank you so much for your generosity in doing so. We still have, now 2,850 to raise to make our goal. Hopefully we'll do so over the course of this week, and I will remind you on these upcoming live streams as well about this fundraiser, but I appreciate it from everybody. But with, this is of course so that students can take my class, Guerrilla History, Anti-Colonial Resistance, History Theory Practice, David Yagubian's course on social biography, and I think there are other things like calculus and other things that people who are going to help rebuild their society and become engineers and architects and so on also need. So good things too. So do help them be able to continue their education. But let's take a look at the nominated Lego video. They're coming out like absolutely every day practically, so there's a wealth to choose from the last week, but this is the one we're gonna watch from, I think, Benji, you nominated Your Oil Is Gone. So let's take a look at this one. And let's see if I can share it so that we can see it. And let's make it big. All these steps.
And take the comment away if you can.
And take what? Sorry?
Remove the comment on the bottom.
Remove the comment on
from praise the sun.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. How do I do that? I got to go find that one. There we go. All right. Let's start it up.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم انا فتحنا لك فتحا مبینا.
Oh, verily God gives a clear victory as the final, after seeing the target list, the final kind of statement there. Another masterpiece from Explosive Media. Yes, somebody points out Zulfikar there. We had the helmet with the, with the, feathers in green, so we're getting used to recognizing the visual iconography of Iranian Lego Shiite theology and history, as well as politics. Again, wow, fascinating. Another masterpiece. Any other final thoughts on the Lego video?
The 18 to 25, this group are 18 to 25. They're all university students from many different subjects. If you watch closely this video, you'll see many Easter eggs. For example, at one point there is a mug, and on the mug is written loser tears. But those are delicious too.
Yeah. Wow. So basically, Benji, you're on the same wavelength in terms of your, kind of humor and material expression of that humor. Awesome. That is quite an endorsement.
If I may brag for a minute, I'm on this special Telegram group from them that sends us little still images from their videos and stuff. And so they were talking about all the Easter eggs. So it got me looking for them.
Excellent. Well, you're great to have to break down, like, the hidden subtext of these Lego videos. But I think the world over, people get the message very clearly from these very effective videos.
I'll just really quickly say, I remember, I think they made 1 or 2 videos during the 12-day war. So it's it's quite amazing to see how it's become like this global hit. So
yeah, that is amazing. I mean, you know, they're driving the resistance culture globally now, so that's just absolutely amazing. And even there's imitations, you know, the imperialists are trying to like kind of imitate and counter, and you know, it just has no juice, you know, because this is expressive of defiant people's resistance. I mean, so it just pulses with a different energy. So Lego for the win again, as somebody put into the chat. Well, folks, it's been wonderful to have you together. Indi had to leave a little early, but as always, a bright star of analysis, you know, shining from him, and everyone else in you know, on this panel. Navid, especially, it was great to have you as a special guest in the history and tradition of great, you know, special guests on the program. This is yet another, you know, wonderful edition with your analysis and, you know, commentary. We thank you so much for joining us. It's been, you know, wonderful. I know everyone in the audience has really appreciated your views and points.
Really appreciate it, Adnan, Benji, and Indi as well. Pleasure is mine, and glad to come on anytime.
Excellent. Well, we might ask you again if this, you know, is a war of attrition, as Nina said on a previous edition. You know, there will be more editions. We will always keep following at least once a week, you know, what's going on, and so there'll be opportunities for more discussion with you, hopefully, in the future. But everybody do go check out AIC's you know, discussion tomorrow at 3 p.m. Will be a good continuation to what we started discussing today. There's always so much news happening every day. So thanks also to all of you in the chat. Thank you for contributing to the fundraiser. Thank you for your comments, your enthusiasm, your good questions and discussion. It's wonderful to create a sense of community and solidarity. This is your haven for anti-imperialist analysis, community, and solidarity. So you make it happen. It's so great to have you with us. And so I want to wish everyone a, you know, peace with justice and solidarity to you all. And it's true, as someone said, we didn't have many trolls today. We must be doing something wrong. Where they could be coming. But at any rate, it's great to have all of you here in the chat. So until next time.
Free Palestine and sweet victory to the free people of the world.
Amen. Amin.
Amen.
Salam, everyone. Peace.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.